Hey there, and welcome back to More Precious Than Rubies, the podcast that celebrates faith, courage, and the power of women's stories. Hi, I'm Ariana, and I'm so glad you're here. If you're new to this series, this is a space where we take a break from the noise of the world and lean into encouragement, truth, and uplifting stories. Each episode, we dive into 3 different segments. The first one's called What's Good, where we highlight some positive headlines. The second segment is called What's Her Story, where we shine a light on an inspiring woman from history or the Bible. And the last one is What's Trending, where we talk about a relevant topic that's impacting women today. So if you're tired of the rage bait and clickbait taking over your feed, this episode is for you. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow More Precious Than Rubies on Instagram and TikTok for even more encouragement throughout the week. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Today, for our What's Good segment, we're kicking off with 3 uplifting news stories that prove kindness, courage, and innovation are alive and well in the world. These are from the Good News Network, which is my new favorite good news source. I've been doing, like I said in my last episode, some digging on K-Love, which is a Christian radio station, and they have a lot of good journalists that are looking into the positive stories happening in the world. So I encourage you to check out those 2 sources if you're looking to add some good news sources to your news feed. And as always, I will link the articles in the show notes in case you're interested in reading the entire article. Last episode, we talked about some kind of more difficult topics. Honestly, there were a couple science topics in there, but this week I've chosen a couple different ones so that I can speak a little bit more into them. The first one is titled Humpback Whales Are Singing More. The number of songs has doubled as food sources become more abundant. So the who of this story, scientists at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in California are analyzing humpback whale songs. So they've seen an increase of singing activity over a 6-year period, and researchers are observing that the number of days that humpback whales were singing has nearly doubled. And they were probably wondering, well, why has this happened? And they've seen that there's been a correlation with their food availability. So the increase in singing has been linked to the abundance of their prey, suggesting that when food sources are plentiful, humpback whales are more vocal. I mean, honestly, I feel like I can kind of relate to that, right? Like, I feel like if I am fully fed, I'm more likely to be happier and in a better mood. And it's kind of fun to think about this. If you've ever heard humpback whale songs or dolphin songs, they're so interesting. I love hearing animal noises that we don't normally get to hear in regular settings. And so the way that they're doing this, their research methodology, is that scientists are monitoring whale songs in the Pacific Ocean, and they found that year-to-year variations corresponding with changes in prey availability, like I said. So Dr. John Ryan, who is a biological oceanographer for this article, he says, quote, "The results suggest that an understanding of the relationship between whale song detection and food availability may help researchers to interpret future hydrophone data, both for scientific research and whale management efforts." How cool is that? And this study could actually also better help protect the endangered species because it helps them to understand both, the number of food and krill that whales have access to, and also, if these whales are well fed enough. And so I got to listen to the sounds of the whales that they were making. So again, I'll link the article in the show notes in case you want to hear the song that they were able to pick up on this technology that they use. And it was really cool. It wasn't something that I first expected them to sound like. I've heard a couple different whale sounds, but I encourage you to go listen to it because it was really cool. And I kind of like to think to myself, like, what could they be saying? And like I said, like I teased earlier, I mean, I feel that too. Like if I was well fed and I, wasn't starving, I feel like I would be in a better mood too. So I totally understand where they're coming from, being more vocal if they're well fed. Okay, so our second story today is titled Archaeologists Discover First Pharaoh's Tomb in Egypt in Over a Century. So this was a discovery done by a British Egyptian archaeological team. They uncovered the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose II, who reigned from 1493 to 1479 BC in the western valleys of the Theban necropolis near Luxor. This is the first pharaoh tomb discovery since King Tutankhamun's in 1922. And this tomb was found empty, likely due to flooding and deliberate clearing shortly after the king's burial. As I'm sure many of you have heard that, tomb robbers were not uncommon at the time. If you know or remember when studying history, probably in middle school, the pharaohs believed that they would go on to an afterlife. So they would bury all their treasure and their gold and their jewelry with them. And so a lot of grave robbers would try to go into the tomb and get the treasure after the pharaohs died. So archaeologist Piers Litherland, who had been excavating the area for a decade, said, quote, "In fact, the tomb turned out to be completely empty, not because it had been robbed, but because it had been deliberately emptied," end quote. And then he says in another quote, "When we worked out that the tomb had been flooded, it had been built underneath a waterfall, and it had filled with water at some stage within about 6 years of the burial," which is so interesting to me. When I got the chance to visit Egypt last year for work, we got to see the pyramids, and it was incredible. And it was kind of hard to imagine what they looked like back then, mostly because the pyramids were just outside the city. And yes, they were in a desert environment, but, a lot of times in the movies, you see the pyramids right along the Nile and there's palm trees and, it kind of looks like a desert oasis of sorts, but it was just really different to see it in a modern time period. And so I can't even imagine what a waterfall would have looked like with the pyramids. And the fragments that were found of the tomb were inscribed with Thutmose II and Hatshepsut's names were found, confirming the tomb's ownership of the pharaoh. So researchers believe that a second intact tomb may exist nearby, potentially holding even more artifacts. And I remember the time when I visited Egypt and we got the chance to go into the pyramid and see a tomb room where there was just a big stone tomb that was believed to belong to one of the pharaohs or the pharaoh's wives. And oftentimes the pharaoh got a really big pyramid and then his wife or wives got smaller pyramids next to it. So it was super cool to kind of see it. Again, it's kind of like, it's a lot different than what you see in the movies, right? Because there's no longer treasure in those tombs and in the pyramids. And one of our tour guides was saying that the reason why we were able to even enter into the pyramid is because grave robbers back then had tried to use dynamite to blow a hole into the pyramid and then steal the things in the tomb. And so because of the nature in which these pyramids are built, it's really hard to try to get into them because, a lot of times the bricks will fall and collapse the whole entire pyramid. So it was really cool that archaeologists can continue to do this work on the pyramids while keeping the history of the pyramids intact. And I even got to visit the things that were uncovered from Tutankhamun's tomb, his gold headpiece and pieces from his sarcophagus, and it was just really cool to be able to experience that. So this story meant a lot to me because I kind of got to be a part of that this past year. And the third story today is called Daredevil Cat Takes to the Skies with Parachute Skiing Adventures. So this was a fun one. I mean, I had to add a couple animal ones in there today. So this was a story about a Bengal mix cat named Thoth, who has been accompanying his owner, Ivan Kuznetsov, on parachute skiing excursions at a ski resort in Russia. And I was watching the video of this cat being strapped to Ivan and sporting his own tiny helmet, and I just couldn't help but crack up because Bucky, who's sitting right here next to me, my dog, I don't think I could ever imagine him wanting to even do something like that. He's a little scared and nervous at new situations. So I was cheering this cat on because he was just like soaring through the sky and just embracing the thrill of the adventure. So I was proud of Thoth. And this was kind of cool to see because obviously Thoth trusts his owner a lot to be in this random, backpack situation going through the sky. And that was really fun to just see this cat adventuring with his owner. Ivan, who is an alpine ski instructor and skydiver from Russia, said, quote, "During the flight, he looked around with curiosity and was totally calm." So that was really just fun, again, to watch the experience between this cat and owner, because I marvel at that. Bucky, I don't think, would ever want to do something like that with me. So good for you, Thoth. You keep going with Ivan. I would love to know if your animal has ever taken an adventure like that, or do you think they would even be able to do something like that? Let me know in the comments, because Bucky would definitely not be able to do that. Going into our second segment today, what's her story? So to continue our celebration of Women's History Month, we're shining a light on 3 incredible women from different backgrounds and cultures who fought for equality, justice, and change. So as always, I will link the sources of my information in the show notes as well for these women. The first woman who I'd like to celebrate today is Jovita Idár, who was alive from 1885 to 1946. And she was a Mexican-American journalist and activist. She was a journalist, a teacher who fought for Mexican-American civil rights, education, and women's suffrage in the early 20th century in Texas. So she used her platform to challenge racism, advocate for bilingual education, and push for equal rights. Idár came from a family of journalists. Her father, Nicasio Idár, founded La Crónica, a Spanish-language newspaper in Laredo, Texas. So in 1914, she worked for El Progreso, another newspaper that criticized the U.S. government's treatment of Mexican Americans. The Texas Rangers actually came to shut down the paper because of its critical stance, but Jovita stood at the door and physically blocked them from entering. She was also a pioneer in the Mexican feminist movement. She was part of the League of Mexican Women, one of the first known feminist organizations in Texas. She pushed for women's suffrage, bilingual education, as I mentioned, and better schools for Mexican American children who were often segregated and given fewer resources. She provided medical aid during the Mexican Revolution, where she traveled across the border to work as a nurse for soldiers and civilians wounded in battle. She even helped to organize relief efforts and was dedicated to serving her community in times of crisis. So why does she matter today? Well, Jovita's fearless journalism and activism reminds us of the power of the press and the importance of standing up for marginalized communities. Her fight for equal education, women's rights, and freedom of speech still resonates in modern discussions about immigration, racial justice, and bilingual education in America. The second woman I'd like to highlight is Rosalind Franklin, who was alive from 1920 to 1958. She was a British chemist and X-ray crystallographer. Rosalind was a brilliant scientist whose work was instrumental in discovering the double helix structure of DNA. Though James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins are often credited with this breakthrough, Franklin's X-ray diffraction images actually provided the key evidence, yet she was largely unrecognized in her time. She was a pioneering female scientist in a male-dominated field. So Franklin studied chemistry at the University of Cambridge, where women were still often discouraged from pursuing science. She earned her PhD in physical chemistry in 1945, and later worked at King's College London, where she led research on X-ray diffraction, a technique that helps visualize molecular structures. Franklin's famous Photo 51 was a groundbreaking X-ray image that revealed DNA's helical shape. Her precise research showed that DNA molecules were arranged in 2 spiraled strands, which helped James Watson and Francis Crick build their famous double helix model. Without Franklin's permission, Maurice Wilkins, her colleague at King's College, shared her X-ray findings with Watson and Crick, who then published their DNA model in 1953. Franklin's contributions were not fully acknowledged in their Nobel Prize-winning work in 1962, as the award was given 4 years after her death from ovarian cancer. But today, Franklin is finally credited as a key figure in DNA's discovery. Franklin's determination and brilliance helped lay the foundation for modern genetics and molecular biology. Her story is a powerful example of how women's contributions to science have often been overlooked, but deserve to be remembered and celebrated. And the third woman that I'd like to celebrate today is Mary Tape, who was alive from 1857 to 1934. She was a Chinese-American civil rights activist. She was an immigrant whose legal battle in Tape versus Hurley in 1885 challenged racial segregation in California's public schools. She fought for the right of her daughter, Mamie Tape, to attend a whites-only school, paving the way for future desegregation efforts. She was born in China, and then she immigrated to the U.S. in the 1860s, where she was orphaned and then raised by a white foster family in San Francisco. She married Joseph Tape, a fellow Chinese immigrant, and they became one of the first affluent Chinese-American families in San Francisco. In 1884, the San Francisco Board of Education refused to admit her daughter Mamie into a public school because she was Chinese. Mary and Joseph sued the school district in Tape versus Hurley, 1885, arguing that Chinese children deserved equal educational rights under California law. The California Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Tapes, stating that all children, regardless of race, had the right to a public education. However, in response, San Francisco quickly opened a separate Chinese school, forcing Mary's daughter to attend segregated education. So while her case didn't fully end segregation, it set a legal precedent for challenging discriminatory laws. Decades later, as you may well know, her fight influenced cases like Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, which ruled racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. Mary Tape was one of the first Asian American women to take legal action for civil rights in the U.S. Her courage and persistence laid the foundation for future fights against racial discrimination, particularly in education. Women's History Month is a time to recognize and honor the voices that history often overlooks. Women like Rosalind Franklin, Mary Tape, and Jovita Idár didn't just contribute to their fields, they paved the way for future generations. Their courage and determination reminds us that change happens when people are bold enough to stand up for what's right. To end off our episode today, I'd like to talk about what's trending. And today, if you remember, I'm going to be talking about the love languages conversation. So lately, love languages have been trending again, whether it's on social media, in relationship discussions, or in self-care conversations. But what are they, and, well, why do they matter? The concept of love languages was created by Dr. Gary Chapman to describe how people give and receive love. So if you didn't already know, there are 5 primary love languages: words of affirmation, or feeling love through kind words and encouragement; acts of service, which is when you feel loved when others do thoughtful things for you; receiving gifts, which is when you feel loved through meaningful or thoughtful gifts, as it probably is obvious enough; quality time, which is when you feel loved when people give you their full attention; and physical touch, which is when you feel loved through hugs, hand-holding, or simple touch. So understanding your love languages and those of the people around you can strengthen relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship, in your family, or your friendships. And I said love languages earlier because I truly believe you can have more than one. If you're someone who has already understood love languages, you probably have already realized that either as you've grown up or as you've better understood what love languages are, you've found that you kind of have maybe multiple that you realize you're better at either giving or receiving. So this concept isn't just about romance. It can apply to how we connect with God, our friends, and even ourselves. Like I mentioned before, I think as I've gone through my life, it's helped me to notice how I've grown as a person. When I first started studying love languages, I remember this was when Adam and I had just started dating again after we had broken up, and it was really important for us to determine this conversation of love languages because we had known each other since we were in high school, and we realized that we had never really been able to be separate and grow on our own, and so our love languages had changed since we last dated in high school. And so I think that taking the love languages quiz has been really helpful in our relationship, and just noticing doing it every year has actually been really helpful for us because we've noticed as our marriage grows, like how can we change with the love languages that we feel. Something that we've learned in marriage counseling as well is kind of like a love languages meter, or seeing like what level are we at today? Where's our love tank when it comes to being full or empty? And like, how can we fill up our love tank for each other? And oftentimes the things that fill up our love tank come from our love language. So I've also found that my love languages are different in different scenarios. So at work, The way that I feel most loved or appreciated is in words of affirmation. So in my work, I often find myself most confident in the work that I'm doing when I'm verbally confirmed that, yes, you are doing a good job. This looks great. In my relationship with Adam, I find that the thing that means the most to me is acts of service. So if he takes the time to do something that I ask him to do, that means a lot to me. It helps to take stress off of my shoulders, and it helps me to feel comforted and solid in our relationship. Whereas for him, that might look a little different, right? Like he really likes physical touch. So even though that's not my love language, I know that in order to keep his love tank full, I have to be able to reciprocate that love language to him and show him that I care about him as well. So whether you're a believer or not, I think that these love languages are really helpful in relationships and our friendships, like I said, but the Bible does tell us that love is the greatest commandment, 1 Corinthians 13:13. So knowing how we express and receive love helps us live that out in meaningful ways. So, do you know what your love language is? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I'd love to hear how your love language has changed over the years, maybe as you've grown more into an adult or as you've entered relationships. Like, how has that changed in your life? And how can you use your love languages to show love to those around you? So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank you for being here and making this space a part of your day. We talked about the good things happening in the world, like archaeological breakthroughs and environmental changes and how those are affecting our wildlife. We also reflected on 3 fearless women and how they used their life to help others. We also explored love languages, a trending topic that can help us build stronger, more intentional relationships. So if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with a friend. You can also follow More Precious Than Rubies on Instagram and TikTok for more uplifting content throughout the week. Next week, I'll be sitting down with my good friend Haley, who's a devoted wife and compassionate ER nurse. We'll explore the profound connections between her modern-day vocation and the biblical figure of Phoebe. And in the next solo episode, we'll be diving into the power of community and female relationships, so you don't want to miss it. Until next time, remember, you are worth far more than rubies. Set about your work vigorously with arms strong for your tasks. Open your arms to the poor and extend your hands to the needy. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised.